Hello, and welcome to the seventh installment of translating Julius Caesar's account of the Battle of Pharsalus in Book 3 of his Civil War. Today we're up to section 89. So in the last section, Caesar had outlined Pompey's dispositions for the battle, and in this present section, he's now going to outline his own dispositions, at least so far as the infantry is concerned. And so, without further ado, into the text. Caesar superius institutum servans decimam legionem in dextro cornu, nonam in sinistro colloca verat. Tametsi erat Doracanis Proelius vehemente attenuata, et huic sic adjunxit octavam ut paene unam ex duebus efficeret, atque alteram alteri praesidio esse userat. Okay, so we start off the first line with Caesar as the subject in the nominative singular. That's going to be in agreement with servans here, which is the present participle. And Caesar is also going to be subject for the main verb here, colloca verat. But going with the participle first, servans, meaning here retaining. So I think I covered this in an earlier section, but the verb servare, from which we get words like servant and so on in modern English, has a sense of retaining or maintaining in classical Latin. And so from that, we get the notion of a retainer who is either a servant or part of a lord's retinue in sort of medieval times. And so Caesar, in this case, retaining, and the direct object here is institutum, qualified by superius, the comparative adjective. So superius, a temporal sense here, meaning earlier, and institutum, accusative singular, meaning organization or practice. And so Caesar is retaining, you might supply his in English, his earlier practice. And now we go to the main verb, colloca verat. So in the pluperfect tense now, third person singular, active, indicative. English co-locate roughly means the same thing here. He's placed together. In this case, indicating placed together in the battle line as a whole, because as we'll see, he's put two legions in two different places, but he means here placing together in the battle line, and he's placing together, so our first direct object is legionem, so that's a feminine accusative singular, with the ordinal decimam agreeing with it. So the 10th legion in dextro cornu. He's placed preposition in with the ablative singular, in this case, of wing, qualified by the adjective dextro, right-hand side. So on the right-hand side, he's placed the 10th legion, or he's deployed the 10th legion. And the next direct object is nonam, which is another ordinal. Note the feminine accusative singular here, so it's referring to a legion. Caesar doesn't feel the need to keep repeating the word legion, though. So the 9th, in this case, in sinistro, preposition in with the ablative singular of sinistro, cornu understood, again, a bit redundant. He's already mentioned the right wing. He doesn't need to say the word wing again. It's pretty clear from the context. So in sinistro on the left. So as we'd say in English, he deployed the 10th Legion on the right wing, the 9th on the left. And into the next clause, tametsi. So we're starting off with a conjunction here. It's sort of a compound of tam et si. In this case, meaning even though. And so he's referring back to the 9th Legion here. Even though Then we've got the verb to be following, erat. So this is in the imperfect tense, third person singular active indicative. This is part of a pluperfect passive indicative, going with the participle attenuata. So even though it had been attenuata, weakened in this case, related to English attenuated. So it had been weakened, it had been depleted, something along those lines, and we have an adverb qualifying that, vehemente, like English vehemently, quite emphatically or seriously weakened, and it had been weakened Duracinus Proelius. So we have the ablative plural of the word for battle here, qualified by the adjectival form of Duracium, agreeing with Proelius. It had been weakened by the Duracian battles. So that's an ablative of manner. You could translate that as even weakened during the Duracian battles, or weakened at the Duracian battles, something along those lines. Means more or less the same thing. And next clause, and we start off with the word and, et. So even though it had been even gravely weakened by the Duracian battles, and sic, so and thus, adjunxit, so there's our main verb, Caes as the subject for this one again, in the perfect tense, third person singular active indicative. English adjoined is somewhat related to this, and that's sort of what it means. He joined in this case, not adjoined, but just joined. Octawam. So we got another ordinal here. This time the eighth. Again, feminine accusative singular, so referring to a legion. He's added the eighth. Huic. So feminine dative singular of the demonstrative pronoun, literally to it. So he's added the eighth to it, and ut here is introducing a consecutive clause. So we've got kind of the result of that adding in the next clause. So we have the subjunctive verb here. This is an imperfect subjunctive. Caesar being the subject, it's third person singular. In this case, active. Efficarat, like English effect, to give effect or give cause to something. Cause to bring into being, and so bring about. In this case, something like formed. Unam. So in this case, the cardinal. Again, feminine accusative singular. It's referring to a legion. So he formed one ex duebus, preposition ex with the ablative plural of two. Again, feminine. He's formed one from two, but he's done so, the adverb here, paine, he's almost formed one from two. And next clause, introduced again by and, atque being a kind of emphatic version of the conjunction. Here you can probably just translate as and. It's not really losing any sense of it. Atque, and our main verb here is userat. Caesar is the subject once again, so it's a third person singular. This time pluperfect active indicative. He had ordered, and this is introducing an accusative and infinitive. It's kind of an indirect command. He had ordered alteram. So we've got a pronoun here. It's a pronoun equivalent to English other, or usually. You can sort of see alter there, like alter ego, which actually is a Latin phrase, alteration and so on, to make something other than what it is. Alteram, feminine accusative singular again, so we're still talking about a legion. So he ordered, in this case, because it is followed by another of the same pronoun. It's something like the one and the other, or you could translate as each. So he had ordered, but literally, you could say he had ordered the one, and accusative and infinitive. So we've got our verb to be in the infinitive, present infinitive. And this is also part of a predicate dative construction. So we have to be praesidio, that's our dative singular, like a guard or a protection. In this case, something more like support. And alteri in the feminine dative singular of alteram. So we have to be as a guard for the other, like dative of benefit for the other. So he had, in more natural English, he had ordered them to support each other or to cooperate, something along those lines. So in the Penguin translation by Jane Gardner, she writes, he had ordered them to cooperate. That's basically the sense of what Caesar is saying here. And so, something I prepared earlier, Caesar, retaining his earlier practice, deployed the 10th Legion on the right wing and the 9th on the left, even though it was seriously weakened due to the Dyrrachian battles, and thus he added the 8th to it, so that he almost formed one legion from the two, and ordered each one to support the other. Okay, so fairly straightforward. Caesar's decided, okay, 9th Legion, it lost, according to his own account, about 960 soldiers at Dyrrachium in the battles which took place there. Even though a legion should normally have about 5,000 soldiers in it, the legions under Pompey's and Caesar's command during the Civil War, particularly in this stage of it, were very much below that, just to begin with. And so the loss of 960 soldiers would be a serious loss under any circumstances, but in this particular case, because Caesar's legions were so under strength to begin with, I think the loss is probably closer to something like 30 or 40% of its fighting strength as opposed to 20. So it's a very serious loss to the point where Caesar believes it can't operate independently in the battle without some kind of support. And so he's forming one from two, as he says here. So that's on the left wing. I think one of the reasons he's also placed the weakened legion on the left wing is that, as he mentions in the last section, the his left wing, or Pompey's right wing, was protected by the riverbanks, which were impassable. So there was very little to no possibility that this legion would be outflanked or have to deal with some surprise attack from the left-hand side of Caesar's army. So it's kind of in the position of least risk in Caesar's battle line. On the other side, the right wing, this was generally considered in ancient times and even up to sort of early modern times, the position of honor in a battle line. And so Caesar, retaining his usual practice, put the 10th Legion on the right wing because it was his favored legion. It was kind of something of a bodyguard as well, in a fairly loose sense of that word. Certainly his favorite legion, though, and one he quite often took personal command of during his Gallic Wars and into the Civil War as well. Okay. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the first sentence there. Fairly long one. And let's move on. Cohortes in Achaea octaginti constitutas habebat, quae summa erat millium duo et ginti. Cohortes duo castris praesidio reliquerat. Sinistro conu Antonium, dextro Publium Sulam, media acquiesce gnaeum dimitium preposuerat. Ipse contra Pompeium constitit. Okay. So here, let's start off with the main verb. So Caesar is the subject for this one, so third person singular. It's an imperfect active indicative. The verb to hold or to have. So he had, you might say. And there's a couple of different ways to approach this earlier part of the clause. So we've got cohortes is our direct object, qualified by the participle constitutas. And then we've got the adverbial phrase here in acquiesce. The number, so it's a cardinal number, octoginti, meaning 80, so that's qualifying cohortes as well. So a couple of different ways to approach it. We can go with the ablative first, though. So you had in acquiesce, in the battle line, preposition in with the ablative singular. In the battle line, octoginti, so 80. Cohortes, that's our accusative plural of cohorts. So one of the 10 operational units in a legion, qualified by constitutas. So feminine plural accusative, agreeing with cohortes. Formed up in this case is probably the most suitable translation. So he had, or even deployed, formed up, deployed. The sense of it is kind of making up in total. So he had 80 cohorts in the battle line, and then we move into a fairly short relative clause here. Quae. This quae is in the feminine. Feminine singular, this is going back to acquiesce. So the antecedent being the battle line, quae summa erat. So summa here meaning in total, something along those lines. In sum, might say in English. So that's in the ablative singular. So quae, feminine singular nominative. Summa in total. Erat, so that's our verb to be, again in the imperfect, third person singular, active, indicative. So quae is the subject for that, which in total was, so it's kind of predicate construction, duo et viginti, 22 million. So genitive plural of the word for thousand. So it's 22, literally of thousands. That's a genitive plural. So yeah, in total, 22,000 soldiers he's referring to in the line, formed up in 80 cohorts, the equivalent roughly of 8 legions. But he goes on. So reliquerat, we've got the pluperfect here. Caesar being the subject, it's another third person singular, active indicative. He left behind duo cohortes, so 2 cohorts, cohortes, accusative plural, castris, so local ablative of the word for camp, in the plural though, as it often is in Latin. We just translate that as singular in English, but he left 2 behind at the camp. Praesidio, again, another predicate dative, say the verb to be understood. Praesidio as a guard, again, as a garrison. And there we go. On to the next sentence. Sinistro cornu Antonium, dextro publium sulam, media acquiesce gnaeum dimitium preposuerat. So we have our another local ablative here. Sinistro cornu on the left wing. Note too, he's not using the preposition in here. It seems to be a feature of Latin when they're writing about military dispositions, omitting the preposition is sometimes acceptable. the local ablative kind of fulfilling the function. The preposition doesn't really need to be there if it's already clear from the context. So on the left wing, Antonium. So this is a proper noun of Antonius in the accusative singular. So he's going to be, along with the other proper nouns there, the direct object of the verb preposuerat. Caesar is the subject for this again. Third person singular, active, indicative, pluperfect in this case. You can sort of see prepositioned in English, or just positioned, which is pretty much what this means. He, again, deployed or placed Antonius on the left wing, so that's with the 8th and 9th legions. Dextro Publium Sulam on the right, Publius Sulla. Media Acciae on the middle line, or in the middle line, we might sound a bit more natural in English. Gnaeum Domitium, Gnaeus Domitius. So these are the commanders for the different legions. So he has Publius Sulla on the right with the 10th, the middle line under Gnaeus Domitius with the 11th and the 12th, which is not clear from this section or the sections which we've already covered. It's much, much earlier that we see which legions Domitius had under his command, and it's the 11th and the 12th. Plus, however the cohorts have been distributed throughout the line. So we can see here, this only adds up to 5 legions that Caesar has directly mentioned, but he has another, well, subtracting the 2 that he's left behind at the camp, he's got another 28 cohorts throughout his battle line. These are not directly mentioned, though, so it's not exactly clear where they are, but presumably each of these commanders has additional cohorts on top of the legions which Caesar has already mentioned. Except for what we will see in a moment, except for those cohorts, he withdraws from the third line. But okay, on to the final sentence of this part of it. Very quick and short sentence. Ipse contra Pompeium constitit. So the verb Caesar is our subject once again, third person singular, active indicative in the perfect tense. Again, it's another word for positioning. So he positioned ipse, reflexive pronoun, sorry, not reflexive, emphatic. Kind of functioning as a reflexive though. Especially in English translation, you would just translate that as he positioned himself contra Pompeium. So contra, like in English, against. Opposite is probably a more suitable translation. Pompeium. So accusative singular of Pompeius's name. So he positioned himself opposite Pompey. And so Caesar's gone for a bit of a power move there, just to show Pompey how confident he is in victory, despite all of the odds. Okay, so what I have in translation, he had 80 cohorts formed up in the battle line, which in total was 22,000 soldiers. 2 cohorts he left at the camp as a guard. He placed Antonius on the left wing, Publius Sulla on the right wing, and Gnaeus Domitius on the centre line. He himself took up position opposite Pompey. Okay, really straightforward. There's a couple of things I've sort of added into it to make it a bit clearer what Caesar means. So the 22,000 soldiers, I've added the word soldiers. It's not actually mentioned specifically in the text. That's what Caesar means. It's a bit clearer to an English reader, especially a non-specialist, what is going on there. Let's see. Took up position opposite Pompey, so that's what I've done for constitit. Fairly straightforward. Just a few historical notes on the persons mentioned here, our dramatis personae. So, left to right, we've got Antonius on the left. So, the famous Mark Antony, at this time getting towards middle age, a relatively young man. He's about 36 at this point. He'd He was the tribune who had fled to Caesar in the tumultuous final moments before Caesar crossed the Rubicon. So he had fled to Caesar. He'd been sort of manhandled by the Senate when he tried to interpose his veto on senatorial resolutions aimed at Caesar. And Caesar had, as a result, basically Caesar's casus belli was the protection of the tribunes as represented by Antonius. So he was waging war to protect basically the rights of the common people, is a way we'd put it in modern English. Or at least he wanted to present himself that way. Certainly that was his casus belli. Antonius himself had not held any higher office at this point, so he hadn't been a consul, he hadn't been a praetor either. I think he had been quaestor by this point, but quite junior, certainly relative to the other persons mentioned here. But nonetheless, Caesar gave him command of what really was two legions in the decisive engagement. Antonius had served with Caesar in the Gallic Wars, and certainly in the early part of the Civil War campaigns, he had proved himself to be a fairly competent commander. And so, in addition to the fact he was Caesar's relative, he was at this point, you could say, even a proven commander. And so I think this is an additional reason why Caesar has given Antonius command of his left wing in the decisive battle, despite Antonius's relative youth and lack of senior magistracies, his sort of relative inexperience in the political sphere. Normally, this would be considered more of a qualification for command, but in this case, Caesar has placed his faith in Antonius, and it wasn't misplaced either. So that's Antonius. Publius Sulla, he's the eldest out of the three persons mentioned here, even older than Caesar as well, by a fair way. So he had been charged with ambitus, so electoral bribery, about, what would it be? Bit more like 18 years, I think, prior to this. When he ran for the consulship, he won the election, but was then immediately charged with and convicted of electoral bribery. And he has some part to play in the so-called First Catilinarian conspiracy, though Cicero later defends him in a speech, the Pro Sulla. So, bit of a dubious character. Also, the nephew of the dictator Lucius Sulla as well. So he's also quite distinguished, though not necessarily in a good way. Nonetheless, he is the eldest and the most distinguished of the three people mentioned here, so I think this is one of the reasons why Publius Sulla is on the right wing. In age, I think running for the consulship of 65, adding 17 or 18 years, so he's close to 60 by this point. Or at least assuming he's taken up office in suo anno. About 60 years old, so certainly the eldest. And so he's in the position of honor as well on the right wing. I think too, due to Caesar's own tactics in the battle, he's deputized Publius Sulla to take command on the right of the 10th Legion because Caesar will have other work to do. Otherwise, it seems a little bit strange that Publius Sulla is there along with Caesar. And finally, Gnaeus Domitius. Bit of an interesting character is Domitius. He was Caesar's political opponent throughout the 50s, which is sort of the period of the so-called First Triumvirate of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. So he was an effective opponent even during Caesar's consulship. Domitius himself achieved the consulship of 53, I think the year 53. So this is after the famous or infamous conference of Lucca between the triumvirs. They had, like Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, had their own candidates for the consulship, but they were soundly defeated in the election, one of the victors being Domitius himself, in opposition to the triumvirs. So he was Caesar's political opponent for quite some time. It seems in the latter part of the 50s, perhaps, he's changed sides. So his son served with Caesar in the Gallic Wars, and Domitius himself at some point must have come over to Caesar. It's not clear from the evidence, like how and why, but he's come over to Caesar. And by the time this battle takes place, he is so much on Caesar's side that he is commanding the center line of Caesar's army in the decisive engagement. Also quite distinguished, obviously a consular. From memory, he would go on to hold another consulship during the official triumvirate of Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus. So, quite a significant political figure. Later on in the Civil War as well, Domitius would have independent command in what is now modern Turkey when Pharnaces, the son of Mithridates, would invade the place. But Domitius was defeated, and Caesar would have to come back and win the Battle of Zela. In any case, quite a distinguished fellow in his own right, and curious that one of Caesar's political enemies had come over to his side uh, for the Civil War. It also highlights the difficulties in choosing a constitutional side, you might say. Domitius is generally considered a conservative in his politics up to the time that the Civil War breaks out, and yet he's fighting against Pompey and the so-called senatorial side. So it just highlights some of that complexity that's going on at this time. Final note on Publius Sulla as well. I forgot to mention this earlier. He was the one-time son-in-law of Pompey as well. So another curious change of sides um, that has occurred prior to the outbreak of the Civil War. And there we go. Moving on to the next. Yeah, that's going to be another long sentence. All right, moving on to the next one. Simul his orebus animad vorsis quas demonstravimus timens nea multitudine equitatum dextrum conu circum veneretur celeriter ex tertia acie singulas cohortes detraxit atque ex his quotam instituit equitatuique opposuit et quid fieri velet ostendit monuitque eius die victoriam in eadam cohortium virtute constare. Okay, that was a lot to say. Starting off with simul, here meaning at the same time. And we finally have a long-lost ablative absolute here. It's been ages, actually. Normally Caesar has them everywhere, but In any case, the demonstrative pronoun in the ablative plural his, agreeing with rebus, that's our noun for the ablative absolute. These matters, say feminine as well. That's going to be for quas. So these matters, these things. Animad versus. So we've got the no, just perfect participle in the ablative plural, so agreeing with rebus. This is a compound of a construction we met last time. The animum adverted here in section 88, turning one's mind towards. So in the perfect passive participle, something like these matters being considered, these matters, and simul indicating at the same time. So it's kind of at the same time these matters were being considered. Quas, so relative pronoun, accusative feminine singular, because rebus is feminine, performing a bit of a different function in the relative clause, though. It's a direct object. Demonstravimus. Caesar referring to himself as the writer here, so it's a first person plural, royal pronoun, perfect tense, active indicative. Demonstrated is pretty clear from that. Basically what this means, as we related, as we demonstrated, as we noted. So at the same time, these matters were being considered, which we demonstrated. So all of this that came before it. And we're now going to begin here with a participle in the present tense, timens. So it's a nominative singular. So Caesar being the subject for this as well, but Caesar no longer the first person plural. Timens, like English timidity, so fearing. And now we're going into an indirect statement here. So nay, introducing, it's not quite a negation. It's that the consequences are negative. It's more in the sense of English lest, rather than because he's fearing what is going to happen. He's not fearing that the lion is not going to be surrounded. He fears that it is going to be surrounded, but it's a negative result. And so it's nay in this case. And so that's the verb here means. So that's an imperfect tense. It's third person singular passive subjunctive. We actually have the subject here. It's not the whole line, actually. It's just dextrum cornu, which here is a nominative singular. So cornu, fourth declension. So all of the endings look the same, except I think it's the genitive that looks slightly different. But cornu, that's every other case. But dextrum, and it's neuter as well. So dextrum, nominative neuter singular, going with cornu. So fearing the right wing, or fearing lest the right wing, circum veneretur, be surrounded, a multitudine equitatum. So preposition are with the ablative multitudine, like multitude. So by the great number, and like in English, it's a great number of something. So in this case, the great number equitatum of cavalry in the genitive plural. So fearing lest the right wing be surrounded by the great number of cavalry. Adverb here, celeriter, like English celerity. So quickly. Where do we want to start here? We'll go to the verb detraxit. So Caesar being the subject, it's third person singular, active indicative, perfect tense. Again, English detract, like to take away. It's what this verb means, detraxit. kind of day tracks it, so to pull away from something. Extertia, yeah, extertia acciae. So preposition ex with the ablative singular acciae, tertia qualifying acciae, the ordinal for third. So from the third line, singulas cohortes, that's our direct object for detraxit. So cohortes, accusative plural, singulas, the adjective agreeing with cohortes, individual cohorts. From the third line, he's withdrawn individual cohorts from the third line, atque and ex his, so preposition ex with the ablative plural of the demonstrative pronoun. From these, instituit, Caesar again, our subject for this verb, third person singular, active, indicative, perfect. He created in this case, like instituted in the sense of creating something. Quartam. So we have the ordinal for fourth, feminine accusative singular. This referring to a line. So used substantively here. It's really an adjective, but used substantively. So he's created a fourth, right? Supply an indefinite article there in English. Que and opposuit, another verb. Caesar being the subject, third person singular, active indicative perfect tense. Like English oppose in this, or more like opposite actually. It's kind of a compound of oppono to can mean to place in the way of something, place as an obstacle, and therefore to place in opposition to something. So it's really he deployed in opposition to, and that's going to take a dative object, equitatui, to the cavalry. Say dative singular. So he's deployed them, the fourth line, opposed to the cavalry, deployed in opposition to the cavalry. Et and another verb, third person singular active indicative, perfect tense, Caesar, the subject again, ostendit, like English ostentation, like to show something though, to demonstrate. And that's basically what it means here. And he demonstrated quid, literally what, wellet, and we're into an accusative and infinitive here actually. So ostendit is introducing the accusative and infinitive indirect statement. So quid is in the accusative singular. Wellet, it's a subjunctive though, so it's, pardon me, no, it's wellet that introduces the accusative and infinitive with fieri. Ostendit does introduce an indirect statement, but wellet is a subjunctive verb. But he showed, quid still accusative, he showed what? He wished, so that's an imperfect subjunctive, third person singular active, active, not indicative, it's subjunctive. What he wished, fieri, to be done. So he gave orders in some sense. That's how I've translated it. He gave orders for what he wanted to be done. Que and monuit, that's our verb again. Third person singular active indicative perfect tense. Caesar, the subject again. He advised or he warned, and he warned that, and that is going into an accusative and infinitive, so another indirect statement. He warned that. Let's see. Our accusative here is victoriam. So we have victory, accusative, singular feminine. This is going to be qualified with eos da. So eos is the demonstrative adjective. This is feminine genitive singular. agreeing with DA, day. So here, this day's victory. So it's a kind of possessive genitive. This day's victory. And our infinitive is constare. That's a present active infinitive. Kind of a combination, like a compound of constare, like standing together. In this case, it's more like depending upon something. The gerund of, so there's stare and then constare, which is a compound. The gerund of stare, is standum, from which we get English stand. And so we will often ask things like how things are standing. What is the standing of such and such? Meaning how are things? How are these things going? What is the state of things? Which state itself would come from the supine form, I think. And in modern Italian, stare is another verb meaning to be, though it literally means standing. But in addition to essere, you have stare in modern Italian. Kind of, if you think of in Lord of the Rings, because we need a Lord of the Rings reference in this video, when Galadriel says to Frodo, the quest stands upon the edge of a knife, stray but a little, and it will fall. So the stands bit there, it's sort of somewhat abstract. I mean, it's not literally standing, so it's on the edge of a knife. It's depending upon the edge of a knife, and if it strays but a little either side, it's going to all fall apart. It will fall. And so that sort of abstract sense of standing is what is meant here. So another way of saying that is that the quest depends upon the edge of a knife. And so the day's victory would depend upon, and so we've got the preposition in with virtute here. It's going to, basically stand upon virtute, the valor, probably the best translation of that. It's not really virtue in the way we'd understand it in modern English. It's sort of masculine military valor that is meant here, like military virtue in the sense of effectiveness in combat. It's not virtue in the more sort of Christian religious sense. Um, he's not asking for his soldiers to perform like saints. He wants them to fight hard, and so that is really what he means here. Um, and we've got another possessive genitive, eadem cohortium. Demonstrative adjective, genitive plural, agreeing with cohortium, both genitive plural, of these cohorts. So it's the day's victory would depend upon the valor of these cohorts, those ones which he had withdrawn from the third line and created a fourth. And so what I have here, as these matters which we related were considered, fearing lest the right wing be surrounded by the great number of cavalry, he quickly withdrew individual cohorts from the third line and created a fourth from these, which he positioned opposite the cavalry. He gave his operational commands and warned that this day's victory would depend upon the valor of these cohorts. Okay, so we have Caesar's plan for victory basically outlined here. It's not stated in the text at this point how many cohorts Caesar withdrew. Later on, when he describes the engagement itself, he either, depending on the manuscript, he either withdrew 6 cohorts or he withdrew 8 cohorts. So in the edition I have in Kennedy, he goes with 6, but I've seen in Scullard's The Gracchi to Nero, he refers to 8 cohorts. So it seems as though in the manuscript tradition, both of those have a fairly strong support in scholarly opinion. Either way, 6 or 8 cohorts, he's withdrawn from his third line to form this fourth line, which he's positioning opposite Pompey's cavalry. It's not exactly support for his own cavalry. It seems as though by this point Caesar has decided that his own cavalry is not going to be a significant factor in the battle. Just as we saw when Pompey was outlining his plan for victory, he didn't even bother to mention Caesar's cavalry. Similarly, in his own plan for victory and his own dispositions, Caesar doesn't even bother to mention his own cavalry. It just seems to be a total write-off. They're not really going to do anything. And so it's going to depend upon these cohorts, which he's forming as a fourth line. In the standard triplex Achaeas formation for the legions of this time and sort of into the early imperial period as well, the 10 cohorts of a legion would usually be formed up with, well, I think of it as a football formation, 4-3-3, except the 4 is the front line, and then 3 in the second line, and another 3 cohorts in the third line. And so commanders would usually, like Roman commanders in command of legions, would, without exception almost, fight in this manner, would deploy their legions in this manner and expect them to fight in this way. And that's, by implication, that's exactly what Pompey's done. Caesar has decided to innovate on this. And so, as I said in the section on Pompey's plan for victory, it was an assumption, and a fair assumption, that Caesar would just deploy 3 lines per the sort of standard disposition. But it turns out, no, Caesar's going to come up with his own battle plan. He's going to play with the dispositions bit and create a 4th line. And so he's withdrawn from the 3rd line, and it's unlikely he's withdrawn these cohorts from his left wing because of how seriously weakened it was. So it seems as though he's withdrawn these cohorts, if not entirely, then most of them from the 3rd line of the center and right wing, and place these as a 4th line. Okay, and on to the last sentence of the section. Simul tertiae Achaeae totique executui imperavit ne in iussu suo conquererent, se cum id fieri velat vexillo signum deturum. Okay, so we start off this one with simul again. I think in this case it means something more like in this vein, in the same vein. And though, I mean, it could be at the same time as well, and that sort of captures the same sense. So either at the same time or in the same vein. Imperavit, so that's our main verb. That's Caesar the subject, so third person singular active indicative, perfect tense. He commanded, and that's going to take dative objects and also introduce an indirect command here. So we have he commanded Curtiae Achaeae. Yeah, and then totique executui. Okay. So Achaeae, that's our dative feminine singular. Tertii, the ordinal adjective agreeing with Achaeae. So the 3rd line, que, and executui, That's our dative of the word for army, and toti, the adjective qualifying executui. Toti, like total in English, so the entire army. So he's ordered the third line and the entire army, or the army as a whole. Nay. So we've got our indirect command here. In this case, it is acting as a kind of negation. So not concurrent, not to advance in this case, or not to attack or charge. Concurrent, third person plural, active, subjunctive. So this is referring to, well, the third line and the army as a whole. And we have an ablative phrase here, in yusu suo, which is kind of adverbial. So not to charge. In yusu, it doesn't quite mean unordered. In this case, like it does in a sense, but it's more like it's more active. It's on its own initiative. So we got the possessive adjective agreeing with inyuso in the ablative singular. This is third person, so this is referring to the army. Also, that's masculine, so also referring to the army, not the line. Yeah, not to charge, not to attack, or by its own initiative, rather, in the ablative. And like Caes is going to complete the sense of that. Here, I don't think it really needs to be explained for that reason. Okay, we'll start here. So we've got our nested temporal clause here in this case. So cum, when, wellet. So again, we've got the imperfect subjunctive, third person singular, active. When he wished, it, literally it, fieri, again, to be done. So that's another passive infinitive. So when he wished it to be done, and then we go into an accusative and infinitive, which is dependent on wellet. So we got a temporal clause, the main verb of which is introducing an accusative and infinitive. So it's introducing an indirect statement from a temporal clause. When he wished it to happen, when he wished it to be done. Reflexive pronoun in the accusative singular, he himself. Beturum. So this is going to be our infinitive verb. This is future infinitive. So the verb to be sa understood. Datorum, he would give, and that's accusative singular agreeing with signum. He would give the signal. Vexillo. Ablative singular, by means of a flag or by means of a standard. So Caesar's made it quite clear he doesn't want his third line or his army to advance or to attack without him specifically giving the signal, which kind of gives you some idea as well that Caesar was willing to let his troops kind of take the initiative in some battle scenarios. But in this case, he definitely doesn't want them to do this. And so, just as what I've got in translation, similarly, he ordered the third line and the army as a whole not to charge on its own initiative. He himself, when he wished the attack to be carried out, would give the signal with a standard. So I've stretched out a little bit. Instead of saying when he wished it to be done, I've said when he wished the attack to be carried out, just to be a little bit clearer. I mean, it's not what it literally says. It's just stretching it out in English to be clear, but literally when he wished it to be done. He would give the signal with a standard. So it's either a flag or a standard. I think a standard is probably a bit more visible, but either one, flag or a standard. And similarly for Seymour, just to indicate it's kind of in the same vein as his previous commands. So we get Caesar's plan of battle to some extent here, except again the cavalry don't feature. It does seem as though nobody's taking Caesar's cavalry seriously, despite what he had to say in earlier sections about, I mean, their ability to withstand the charge of the 7,000 Pompeians and his innovation with deploying light troops and fast troops in support of them. He doesn't really expect them to do very much in the battle. And so he's decided he's going to withdraw a fairly significant force from his third line in expectation of the fact that Pompey's cavalry, will surround his line. Note too, he's ordered the third line not to engage, well, the army as a whole, but he's also specifically singled out the third line not to advance without his express command, not to advance on its own initiative. So again, this is in expectation of Pompey's cavalry attempting to surround his line. So instead of having all three lines in the legion, pardon me again, more or less engaging at the same time or in very rapid sequence, he's going to hold the third line back so that Pompey's cavalry can't surround his army. It's a bit of a risk, especially because he's very much outnumbered in infantry as well. Uh, even even doing a rough calculation of the cohorts that would be in the first line, so roughly about 40% of the fighting force, taking out those cohorts which have been placed on guard duty in the camps or the neighboring forts in Pompey's case as well. We're looking at about 32, well, just under 32 cohorts that Caesar is deploying in his front line. And for Pompey, subtracting the 7 out of his 110, it's just over 100. So it's going to be just over 40 cohorts to Caesar's 32 in the front line. So he's about 3/4 of Pompey's strength, at least in terms of the number of cohorts. But on average, the number of soldiers in his cohorts is far lower than Pompey as well. So I think for Caesar at this time, it's somewhere below 250 soldiers on average. For Pompey, it's around 300. So the disparity in infantry numbers is pretty severe. But even then, Caesar's willing to take the risk and only have his forward two lines engage and hold back the third line in expectation of Pompey's cavalry surrounding him. And so something I prepared earlier, we'll see how this goes. I tried to create a diagram of what's going on at this point with all the dispositions, just to make it a little bit easier to understand. So this is me with my fairly basic HTML skills. I'm still learning, also learning JavaScript, so I can get some fun movements and so on going on with this, but let's see how this goes. So we have here what I've created in HTML. My skills are very basic, but I'm still quite proud of this. It took a lot of work, especially with the transforms. It takes a little bit of getting used to how it recalculates the XY coordinates. But anyway, we have up here, we have Pompey's line. So Pompey on the left with the 1st and the 3rd Legion, Scipio with the 2 Syrian legions in the center, Afranius on Pompey's right, next to the river, with the Silesian Legion and the Spanish cohorts. Caesar for his part here, so we have Antonius with the 8th and the 9th Legion, again on the river, on Caesar's left. Domitius in the center, with the 11th and 12th Legion, which I've pulled from an earlier part of Caesar's Civil War. And Caesar himself on the right wing, along with Sulla and the 10th Legion, Caesar himself, I assume, is somewhere a little bit back though, because he has to signal to the third line and the cohorts that he's formed a fourth line with when he wants them to advance. But in any case, Caesar and Sulla are on the right, third line here, and either 6 or 8 cohorts, depending on the manuscript script reading, deployed as kind of a fourth line opposite Pompey's cavalry up here, and also opposite the archers and slingers, which Pompey has under his command. So, in a rough sense, this is the dispositions for the battle. And Caesar's neglected cavalry here, so the 1,000 cavalry. I've put expeditique because there are light troops interspersed in units with the cavalry, as I've noted in earlier sections. And for Pompey's cavalry, 7,000 of them, plus the 3,000 archers and 1,200 slingers. And so Pompey's plan is basically to have his archers and slingers advance, take out Caesar's cavalry, which is heavily outnumbered, and from there, from the exposed right wing, surround Caesar's third line and cause the whole of Caesar's army to panic and run. As we can see here, though, Caesar firstly is going to hold back his third line, so it's still going to be in position here when Pompey's cavalry arrives. And he's also got his additional cohorts opposite Pompey's cavalry, also ready when Pompey's cavalry arrive here on the exposed right flank. These cohorts are going to give them a very emphatic welcome. And so that's a fairly basic, very 90s looking diagram, but hopefully that provides some additional understanding to what Caesar's been writing about and what I've been talking about. I think it's a little bit easier to understand when there's a visual up rather than just listening to all the words, even though that is fun. There we go. So those are the dispositions for the battle. Next section, we're going to be moving back into a couple of speeches from Caesar and from one of Caesar's centurions as well, which I've decided to retain just out of a bit of respect for the man's heroics. That will be what we're looking forward to in section 90. And so that's about it for section 89. Hopefully that was relatively interesting and enjoyable and educational. As always, it is just my own translation. This is not definitive and certainly not the only translation that exists. It's just a fun exercise to go through it and get a better understanding of the battle. So thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, take care, and toodle pip.